Hi, and welcome to CMO Journeys. I'm Christian Banak, and on the show, I talk with the marketing leaders behind some of today's most interesting brands. We get into career paths, how they think about marketing, and how they work with agencies. GE Healthcare is a global healthcare company focused on medical technology, diagnostics, and AI-driven solutions that help clinicians make earlier and more precise decisions. Today, I'm joined by Natasha Phillips, who leads marketing for pharmaceutical diagnostics in the US and Canada, bringing a mix of scientific, commercial, and global brand experience to a highly complex category. Natasha, welcome to CMO Journeys.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So this is CMO Journeys, and we like to talk about your journey. So I would be very curious. Tell us, where did you grow up? What type of kid were you? Would people have thought that you would eventually end up as a chief marketing officer?
Oh, it's a deep question, Christian. So I am a Chicago native at heart. I've spent the majority of my life here. So I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago in a suburb called Oak Brook. Most people know the mall. What kind of kid was I? Actually, if I'm honest with myself, I was kind of a nerdy kid. I love going to school. I love math. I love science. And much to my parents' happiness and satisfaction, I was a great student. I think today, if you ask people, are they surprised that I'd be a chief marketing officer? I think the main reason they might be surprised is I always thought I was maybe going to have a little bit more technical or scientific career. And actually, what I love about my journey to chief marketing officer at companies like GE Healthcare is that I was able to really mix together my passion for science and technology and innovation, bringing that to large multinational companies and having the application in healthcare and the innovation in healthcare that can change millions of people's lives. So I don't know if they'd be surprised. I should ask people. I've never done that. So
Yeah. Well, looking back, what would be something that you think people would be surprised by if they found out about you?
I would say probably that I have a more kind of creative side. I actually tend to be pretty traditionally, maybe more facts and data. And if you think about the color wheel blue type of personality, but I think in order to advance not only in industry, but especially in the marketing function, you actually realize that it's a lot of art and a science combined. And so in order to be successful, you need to figure out how to take your passion for, data and facts and numbers and then apply it in a way that you can really help not only meet unmet needs, but also win hearts and minds of people. And that's probably not something I was ever good at, when I was a kid, didn't like art class, didn't like anything creative. And so I think in many ways, I've had to probably become a much more well-rounded human being, as well as just professional in order to be successful throughout my journey. So.
Yeah. Do you find that creative coming out in anything today? Like, are you playing an instrument now, or doing anything
Well, actually, it's
artistic?
interesting you should say that. I did play the piano growing up, and I actually competed mostly because my parents made me. But my brother was the kind of person, he could sit down and listen to anything and play. And I actually had to memorize every single bar and every single note. And I basically used a metronome to be super successful. But I couldn't do it on my own. So I don't actually play anymore, although it is actually my retirement goal. I have a piano at home, so I'm going to pick it up. And I don't have too many cool creative outlets. I wish I did. I'm a little bit boring. In my spare time, I still I read a lot of journal articles because I actually love to see what's going on, not just in my space, but broadly in healthcare. And then, just working and having a busy life. I don't have too many creative outlets, but maybe we should talk in 10 years after I retire, and I'll let you know if I picked up anything creative.
There you go. I hope CMO Journeys is still around in 10 years, and I will take you up on that offer. So very good. So you spend some time in consulting and then in research environments before moving into more of a commercial role at Abbott. And I'm curious, what made you make that shift?
So as I mentioned, I actually was super lucky. I went to high school and college at the time that they were sequencing the human genome. So if any of you those of you who are younger probably won't remember this, but it was a huge deal in the science world. And so I was very interested in that aspect. And so I was trying to determine, what do I want to do with that? So I always knew actually had planned to think about, do I want to get my PhD in molecular biology? Do I want to take my interest and passion in science and advancement and take it into the medical field. But because I wasn't sure, I went into consulting for a company that actually did primarily healthcare consulting, because I thought that would be a good way for me to get exposure to both the provider side, but also the manufacturer side. And I did that for a couple of years and realized very soon getting into that consulting takes you pretty far away from the science and the technical. I don't know what I expected as a, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, 21-year-old college graduate. So after doing consulting for a couple of years, I actually went to work at the University of Chicago with the intention of potentially getting my PhD in molecular biology. It was there that I had an amazing mentor who was the interim chair of the Department of Human Genetics. Her name was Carol Ober, and she was instrumental in not only helping me shape my decision to move more into the commercial world, but also to just encourage me to figure out that there isn't a straight line path. It isn't just you have to get your PhD, even though she was an amazing PhD herself, to be able to take my passion for innovation, science, and bring it. And actually, she saw I had a skill set probably in organizational skills and administrative skills and business skills and in communication skills. And so she was the one who actually encouraged me to go get my MBA, because I think she saw that while I could understand the science and the technical side, maybe sitting, by a bench and by a microscope my whole life might not have been actually where my passion and also my skill set lie. So I made the decision to be a career changer, quit my job, went to business school, and knew I wanted to work only in healthcare companies. So I was not one of those people who went in there and said, oh, I'll be a consultant or what. I had a lot of friends who either wanted to, figure things out. They were very flexible in industry, and I knew I was only going to go work at healthcare companies. And I wanted large multinational healthcare companies that were at the cutting edge of innovation, because I knew I wanted to figure out how to spend my career bringing, innovation and science to healthcare so that I could help change, clinical care pathways. So,
Wow, that's great.
What took me there.
Yeah, that's a great switch. So you did make, though, an interesting move into consumer at McDonald's before ultimately coming back to healthcare. What did that experience teach you that maybe shows up today in how you lead?
Yeah. So at the time, I've always loved marketing, but I've been fortunate enough to work across a variety of different commercial and demand functions, both at Abbott and McDonald's and now at GE Healthcare. Made this switch to consumer primarily because I was starting to see that in every industry, even in a B2B2C business like healthcare, the consumer choice and the trends, the macro trends, were moving towards having every single industry being able to better understand how to integrate the consumer in the overall, journey of whatever product or service you are offering. And I wasn't exactly sure how to bring that to life. And so while I was at Abbott, I was actually trying to work on more, consumer type of brands or brands that had a large consumer component. And through my network had just been, I'd been taking like some interesting seminars or classes or trying to go to workshops. And through my networking, actually found somebody who was looking for someone who had a passion for both marketing, understood the importance of research and health economics and other things, and wanted to bring that to the consumer lens. And so I thought, if I want to be a marketer, why not expand, not just within a certain category, but go, get some breadth. And so if you want to be a good marketer, why not work at one of the best marketing brands in the world, McDonald's? So I got a great opportunity through my network to go work in the family business, and be able to try to bring healthier foods to the Happy Meal. That was a time when millennial parents actually were having pretty significant impact in terms of social choice and the choices that they were making for brands. And so love that experience. One of the things that I learned, which I thought was so cool though, I had so many of my friends shocked that I left and say, there's no way, are you going to be able to figure it out? And what I learned is that regardless of how different the function or the category, there's some universal truths as marketers that if we bring to the whatever business, whatever segment, whatever category you're targeting, you're going to be successful. And that is probably the underlying marketing truth that I love, which is ultimately every single group of individuals, especially if we're going to segment them into a type, really do have dreams, pursuits, desires, and unmet needs. And if you can spend your time figuring out what that is, and you can spend your time getting into the insight of what will make their life better, fuller. Again, I mentioned it's not always an unmet need, sometimes it is. And you make yourself obsessed about that, and then you apply some basic principles around putting the customer first, ensuring that everything that you do is really about enriching and improving their experience with your brand or your product, whatever it might be, and finding the better good for that one segment, category, whatever it is, you're going to be successful. And so I found there was a ton of transferability between what I'd been doing in healthcare when I went over to the family business in McDonald's. And so that was a super fun insight. It actually, I would say, underscored and probably just made me love marketing even more, because I was like, this is super cool. This is what I actually thought was at the core of it all. And now I get to see it come to life. So
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that moving into that you would have came to that same conclusion if you hadn't made that move to McDonald's?
probably not, because I probably would have stayed in healthcare. I would have stayed in pretty much, some of the segments that I was in. Although, the beauty of both Abbott and GE Healthcare is we have broad-based businesses. So you actually get to see some diversity within, the healthcare space. But I'm not sure I would have thought, and now when I mentor people, so, before I probably would have been much more likely to only say, give me people who are interested in healthcare or kind of maybe straight agency or other marketing. But I talk to kids who are looking at jobs in marketing and technology, in banking. And so I'm able to remind them of that and to also help them go and cultivate and figure out their own insights. And it made me feel kind of really just confident about the universal truths around the function. So probably wouldn't have gotten there as quickly, maybe eventually through exposure and through a learning and growth journey, but probably not as quickly and as confidently as I did.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting insight there. And I'm curious, you've made a number of different moves here, especially that McDonald's move. What was there a moment in your career, whether it was that or something else, where you did sort of feel out of your depth and you just had to figure it out? And what did that feel like?
So what I, that's actually a great question, Christian. I think in general, there have always been, I oftentimes, like, I love to be out of my depth. In fact, my career, if you look at it, the reason I think not only have I been successful, but you've seen the movement that I do is because I am very motivated and empowered by learning and feeling challenged every day. And so, in many ways, I think every time you jump into a new business and you're around people, especially at companies like Abbott and G Healthcare, where people have been doing that for 20 years, you feel out of your depth because you're like, I know nothing about this category. I know nothing about the business. I don't know about the micro. I don't know about the macro. I can't figure it out. And you, in order to be successful and bring impact at organizations like ours or actually anywhere, you've got to start bringing something that other people aren't bringing. You got to bring insights. You got to bring value. You got to deliver results. And so I would say every time I join a new business, I feel a little bit out of my depth because for me, in order to be successful, I want to know as much about myself as I do the competitor, as I do the customer, in order to be a successful market or commercial leader. And until I get there, I'm not really comfortable. So I always encourage people, don't worry that you're out of your depth. Figure out how quickly you can get confident. You can be a student of a constant student of everything you're doing, but get to a point where you're competent and confident enough that you actually are able to contribute, and then believe that there's a reason that you're there and try your best every day, and you're probably going to be okay. So, even leaving a company like Abbott and being pretty, tenured, and then being able to come into a company like GE Healthcare, which is an amazing, another 100+ year company with, amazing individuals who have been here for, 20 plus years and know this imaging segment inside and out and pharmaceutical diagnostics inside and out, and never having worked in there, I felt out of my depth. And it always takes a little bit of a transition, but I think as long as you believe in yourself and you understand, again, it gets back to, if you believe, you put the customer, what they need, what they want first, and contextualize it correctly in both the macro and micro environment, you're going to be successful. So.
Yeah, yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable there as well. So, coming into the role at GE Healthcare, what did you feel needed to be true in those first, maybe say 6 to 12 months to make you feel like you're actually making some progress?
I mean, as is always the case when you come in as a new leader, the most important thing is your team has to trust you. So that's like the first thing. And that's not easy, especially if you're, as I mentioned, an outsider to people who have been doing that for a very long time. So the foundation of whether it's peer leadership, informal leadership, or like true formal leadership, I think is really predicated on trust. So that was the first thing I spent time doing. And then the second thing that I really felt was critically important is pharmaceutical diagnostics is at a very interesting part. It's been around forever, right? If you think about what initially 25, 30 years ago, some of these contrast media agents that have been around forever. But the organization and the segment category itself is actually going through a pretty dramatic shift in innovation around the introduction of radiopharmaceuticals, which is, if you think probably 15, 20 years from now, will probably be the major component of what a really strong pharmaceutical diagnostic portfolio looks like. And so what I really had to do was figure out, how do you manage a very important, critical, mature segment of the business like contrast media that's been around forever. And if think about it, if you go in and get an X-ray and they use any sort of contrast, that's a product that has been on the market for 30 plus years and will continue to be, because you're going to need it. It's going to be critically important. And how do you manage that in a meaningful manner and actually really cultivate and optimize that part of the portfolio that's at the mature end of the life cycle, while also getting ready an organization and changing how you guys approach market to bring in a whole new category and segment, new innovation, market creation, skill sets that probably maybe didn't exist before. And so a lot of what I had to do when I first came in was help evolve the organization. Now, the amazing thing about a company like GE Healthcare is you're super lucky. You walk in and there are, as I mentioned, amazingly talented people who are super capable and who are experts in the area in which they're working. And so that makes it your job really, not, I don't want to say easy, but in many ways you got to figure out, you have really smart, partners to help you figure it out with you. And I would say that was probably the second most important thing that I had to do, was figure out, how do we change potentially the structure, the way we go to market, the way we historically operated, in order to get ourselves ready for the future of pharmaceutical diagnostics, which is in fact radiopharma. So.
Yeah, yeah. You've mentioned the customer many times here, but in your role now, the customer isn't one person. It could be clinicians, procurement, health systems. How do you think about how you're actually and who you're really marketing to?
So I have been really lucky, as I mentioned, I had the similar experience in Abbott. And one of the things I've loved about being a marketer in healthcare is the complexity of actually working in a B to B to C business. And that B in the middle is actually a very complex, multi-stakeholder sale. And so exactly to your point, you're selling to individual physicians, you're selling to procurement officers, you're selling to chief medical officers, you're selling to institutions. In some cases, you're selling to GPOs and IDNs. And so for us, it actually is really about being super purposeful, about understanding the various decision making across the stakeholders, being very purposeful about where they sit in the decision making cycle of the entire customer buying journey, and being very thoughtful about who actually at what point in the sales cycle is making the decision. Are they important? And then understanding those groups and how they work together. So as you can imagine, there are a whole bunch of different approaches to do this. There's complex selling. I won't list who we use. I'm sure, the audience knows the variety of different complex B2B selling models that are out there, but we've always employed those, I think, pretty successfully. And then it's making sure that your marketing team is very purposeful and also focused on which segments and which customer and stakeholder groups matter and why at the various points over the selling cycle. And I think doing that actually helps you not only remove the complexity, but add a new layer of fun, because in many ways you get to market to the different groups in different ways. And you also get to lean in depending on where you're at in the sales cycle or the complexity of the sales cycle, right? A pharmaceutical diagnostic sales cycle is super different than a capital imaging sales cycle, as somewhat different than, say, like a large diagnostic sales cycle, which I've been lucky enough to be able to work across all of those. So.
Yeah, yeah. So where are you finding to accomplish this? Where are you finding yourself increasingly spending on? Like, what capabilities are you investing more in?
So right now, where I would say we are investing a lot of our time and effort is in the customization and personalization of those personas and stakeholder groups, kind of within, as I mentioned, that very long and sometimes complex process. And I don't mean that in like the traditional way of like, digital versus traditional type of media, but in really understanding how can you leverage advances in technology to be able to start to create some unique, almost like personalized, like customer by customer journeys that are going to make their experience with your brand and your business much better so that eventually they become a super happy, loyal customer for us. And I would say that's really tough because in healthcare, we're highly regulated. We have to be very thoughtful about what we do and don't do. And we also have to be very thoughtful about technological innovation because, as you can imagine, for a lot of reasons, we're risk averse. The stuff that we do has impact on people's lives. And so we have to be very thoughtful about the way in which we influence the decision making, especially of our healthcare providers who are on the other end determining should I put this in somebody's body or not, and is it the right choice? And so I would say it is really in how do we compliantly leverage technology to help us do that in a way that then once we figure out how to do it, like say with one customer, how do you scale that? Because we have we work, we have very large products. We work with thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of customers. And so if you can't figure out how to scale that, you're definitely not going to be driving the type of shareholder return that is expected of companies like ours. So it's a fun challenge. We face it every day.
Sure, sure. Where would you say you're feeling the most pressure right now, whether that be internally or from the market?
So I continue to say that in healthcare, the most pressure, like it for me, I don't put it just to a functional because if you think about just marketing in its own little functional world, you're really not successful. I always think about marketing in the context, the broader context of what we're accomplishing in healthcare as a business entity. And I would say it hasn't changed for the last 10 years. The biggest challenge that we are feeling is that healthcare, with the exception of like a few industries that are going crazy right now due to investment and all these moonshots and blue ideas and stuff, but healthcare is not one of them, unfortunately. And so they will maybe eventually be enabled by that, but they aren't there yet. Is that our customers are increasingly asked to do so much more with less people, less resources, less staffing, less everything, but less dollars, right? Whether it's reimbursement, other. And in order to continue to support them, we have to be continuously evolving our product offering, the way we go to market, the way we support them with ancillary services in order to ensure that they can provide an increasing level of healthcare service with usually much less. And so that continues to be the ongoing problem for, I would say that's been the case for 15 years. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So.
Yeah. Can you give then a sense of what your marketing function, how it's like structured then internally, and where maybe you're leveraging outside partners to help versus maybe what
So
you have like,
our marketing team is structured really around the franchises. So we have three key care areas that we care about at GE Healthcare: cardiology, oncology, and neurology. So we have structured franchise, basically portfolio franchise teams around those care pathways. So you should think about those as traditional, both franchise and brand marketers who own, responsibility for that particular care pathway. And there might be one product in there might be a few products. And it's their job not only to manage the product portfolio, but also to connect with the broader GE Healthcare, the other segments that actually are, thinking about oncology as a care pathway or cardiology. We then have a what I call marketing analytics and business intelligence team, probably like you see a lot in a lot of healthcare companies. And that team is really an enabler and a vertical that goes across all of the franchises. And then we have marketing communications, marketing operations, pretty probably standard, the way you see most healthcare teams. And they are really what I consider the centers of excellence. Within there, you have all things as it relates to a wide variety, the tech stack, digital, brand, marketing and communications, all of our APR, ad promo, MLR, called different ways, kind of sits there. And again, that to me is the accelerator of all, not only the franchises, but any of the teams actually that need to leverage those two centers of excellences, which are like a little bit, we run them like centers of excellences, which I think about as accelerators. Our franchise marketers work very closely with the regional product management team, who is the team that is actually bringing a lot of, as you think about product and innovation, from a regional point of view into the franchise team's consideration. And I would say our organizational structure is pretty similar to what you see in most healthcare marketing organizations, in pharmaceutical, I would say even med device, and in radio pharmaceutical as well.
Gotcha. And I'm assuming you're working with some outside partners. I'm curious, how do you decide what you're going to keep internally and build internally versus leveraging outside partners for?
This is really a great question, Christian. Probably something that your audience is spending a lot of time thinking about, because we are, with the very quick changes in technology, are really trying to figure that out. I would say I'm going to give you an answer. I can give you a very straightforward answer from 18 months ago, and I can tell you in the last 18 months, that decision calculus is really constantly changing. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, we almost always took anything that required, really, for our leading brands, anything that required any really important creative, strategic launches, and not just the creative, but the messaging, the ownership of the brand, the stewarding of that brand story. We oftentimes do use partners for that. They're our main partners. Even from the beginning, like when we name a product, we use an agency to help us name a product, right? And then ideally, you find agencies that can actually be there with you through that journey, but it's actually hard. Like, I have never found a really good naming agency that then helped me successfully go and launch my product, because there's a lot of specialization. So I would say, if I had to categorize it, we had two types of agencies other than that specialty use case. Like if you're naming, there's some special agencies that will go off for one-offs. So we have usually our strategic partner. And that's the one that, as I mentioned, we take our, leading brands, the ones that are the most important. They own a lot of the kind of creative, what's the look and feel? How are we going to position this brand in the market? And they also help us with the strategic considerations, because in healthcare, it is not just like, how do you show up and what's your color and your logo and all of that. There's actually a lot of complexity. And then we have a second group of agencies, and I describe them. These are actually sometimes the most fun to find. They are kind of tactical, but not just tactical. They're are really good, quick project, really good at execution in certain areas, and are able to come in and plug a lot of the holes that either don't exist in our team, we have a hole, or we can't get from our more kind of strategic full service. These are big spend type of agencies. And those are the ones that I think have found really a good sweet spot, especially in healthcare, because they are able to plug in. Usually they ask for, give me your overall, we got to share our briefs and other things with them, because they have to understand the strategic direction of the brand. They've got to understand the guidelines. They also need to plug in and be able to understand our regulatory and quality considerations. And then they can help us, especially in that personalization and customization that I asked for. Sometimes you got to try things really quickly. You want to do something, you want to kill it pretty quickly. And they can be, I think of them as like our nimble partners who can do that stuff for us very quickly. In full disclosure, as the world changes and technology gets amazing, and we find people who are able to start doing things that I never imagined you could do in 5 minutes with some sort of agent, we are trying to determine what we should be doing in terms of what should be in-house versus out-of-house. And I imagine that's of something a lot of the, your user base is thinking about right now. And I don't have an answer for you yet, because as I mentioned, we're risk averse. There's a lot of considerations about what you can and can't do, and what do you leverage agentic for versus not. And so we don't yet have a point of view. I would say The expectation, the pressure is for me as a leader to figure that out for my team in very short order, to have a point of view, and then to figure out how to safely and responsibly bring new technology into our function. And I would say I'm actually spending a good amount of time thinking about that and working on it right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting times. I don't know if the brands know and the agencies don't know, and I don't think any of us know at this point. And I think it's different. I think in a lot of different organizations. I'm curious in terms of specialization versus maybe having broader capabilities. When you think about partners, especially in the role that you're in today, how important is some sort of specialization in healthcare versus getting some sort of outside perspective from other industries? I'm curious how you think about that.
I would say I actually love outside perspectives. So my favorite agencies are the ones where I know they actually see all the other categories, and we already talked about them: CPG, banking, technology. I mean, I could list
Yeah.
anything, because there's actually probably a lot of cool use cases and learnings that should happen. If you think across the various categories that needs to happen. The biggest challenge that we haven't figured out, and I don't yet know if technology will help us, is there is a lot of rules and regulations. Every single thing that we do, if we put it out, even if it's a tiny little banner ad, goes to the FDA. And so we have a lot of rules and regulation. And as I mentioned, like, it's patients' lives. So we will never, ever take a risk there. And so while I love the idea of finding agencies that do have like exposure to all, like, a lot of learnings that I probably wouldn't get because I'm stuck in my healthcare world, if they don't know how to navigate, what, like, our challenges are, and they do one wrong step, it is probably a risk we're not willing to take. So in that
Yeah.
case, I think that's why the agencies that actually have decided to understand the complexity of our world, understand our rules and regulations, understand how to work in very stringent quality control systems, and understand how to work within our timelines and our expectations. Because it's like, just because everything has to go to the FDA doesn't mean that means you can take a year to get something out, right? You still have to deliver things to the market, whether that's tools, communication, whatever that might be. I'm not talking on the product approval side. I'm talking actually even just on the material approval side. And so it's just, that's the trade-off we always make. And if we're not convinced that an agency doesn't have enough even context about that, it's hard for us to work with them, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's an interesting industry for sure. So as we kind of wrap things up here, we talked a lot about business. I'd like to, have you share maybe something outside of work. You mentioned you have the 10-year plan to pay the piano, right? But what are you doing today when you need to reset or recharge yourself?
So I am super blessed with a husband who I've been with since high school, actually, and three college/high school age children who have helped me stay sane, supported me throughout my career and my journey to get here. So I'd be remiss not to say that when I do get free time, I actually love to find a way to spend time with them, because I have spent a lot of time over the last, all my kids' lifetime and my husband's last 20 years or so on a career, and I've loved it. So I spend a lot of time just trying to figure out how do I have meaningful relationships with teenagers who don't want to spend time with me, and a busy husband who also works full time. When I'm not spending time with them, I actually continue to do all the things that I loved. I mentioned I was a dorky kid as a kid. I love reading. So you'll always find me reading something, reading a book. And, in order to stay sane in today's world as I age, is continue to be focusing on my physical health. So I've been a runner my whole life. I am getting older. So my doctor tells me to think about my joints and not run as much. So I walk more now and hike a little bit more. But I find as I age, that connection to my body and to nature is really important. So you'll find me running outside or going for a hike when the weather's good in Chicago, which is only 4 months because I don't like being cold. And as I mentioned, I have to still figure out what my second life after having a career and three kids looks like. So I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. So I don't know, maybe I'll get into other passions beyond picking up the piano again. Although, to be honest, I haven't figured it out. So
Yeah, yeah. Based on this conversation, I have no doubt you will figure it out. So,
thank you.
Natasha, this
I
has
hope
been
so.
amazing. I really appreciate the conversation, the insights you've shared here. To everybody watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with the marketing leaders that are shaping what's next. I'm Christian Badak. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.